Okay, so just a quick video today on wall mounting for the SONOS Beam, which came out just a few months ago. In terms of what comes in the box, very briefly, it's not an unboxing video. There's really just a few things to worry about. You obviously get your manual, which explains how to mount the device. I bought the separate mount, and you actually get it in white. So if you've bought a white bar, buy the white mount, but this actually sits underneath, and then the soundbar screws in from beneath. So actually, even though this is white, you're probably not going to see much of it anyway. Okay, and then you also get a bag of screws. So you got your raw plugs in there, which actually seem like they're relatively. I normally throw raw plugs away from packets like this, but it seems like the ones in here are actually quite substantial. You also get some white screws, some white-headed screws, and then you get the two little screws that will screw up from beneath the actual bar when it's fixed to the wall, and then attach into the bottom of your SONOS Beam. So so it'll be nice and secure. So you're going to have let me think. Yeah, so you're going to have 3 screws on the wall to support the frame. Then you've got these 2 little very small screws that go into the base of the SONOS, the beam, just to secure it. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is they give you, don't throw this away. This is a piece of cardboard that comes in it, but it's just your template. So you can strap this to the wall and just stick it to the wall, and actually make sure you get it in the right position. So when you're looking at it where your TV is going to go, then you can stand back and actually look at it before you do all that hard work and think, oh, that doesn't look right now. And I actually did move mine a couple of times just to make sure I was happy with it. One thing to bear in mind is there's some controls here on the top. You've got this sort of nice curved effect. You've got the manual controls if you want to use that on the SONOS Beam. So, you know, you can mount it on top of the TV if you want, but I think for most people they'll probably put it underneath. Just make sure you've got enough room to sort of put your hand in and control these if you ever want to. Not that you probably use them that much, but just bear in mind. I'm going to give mine, it says in the book, it says a 1-inch minimum distance. Now I'm giving mine a little bit more, because the other thing to bear in mind is if there are any cables underneath your TV, yeah, you could take the SONOS Beam off if you want, but if you want to quickly go and hook your hand underneath your TV and make a change to one of the cables, then obviously if you've got this quite close proximity to the telly, I guess the base of the telly, then you want to just give yourself a bit of margin there. So I'm going to go for about 2 inches on my one, just to give it close. It doesn't come with a spirit level in the pack, but it does recommend using a spirit level, which should be something you should probably worthwhile considering using. My TV actually is just very slightly off kilter, which is strange because my mount has actually got a spirit level on it when I mounted it, but even with that, almost bang central, the TV's just very slightly off. So even though it says use a spirit level, you want to obviously check that when you put it up against your template, that you know, whatever irregularity a TV's hung at, match that with your SONOS, because you won't notice if the SONOS Beam isn't level, but you will notice it if it's not level against the telly, if that makes sense. Now, I don't have the luxury of having a hole in the wall, and I'm not going to chase out all my walls before, because I had a traditional sort of 5.1 surround sound, which is being redundant now. So my cables are going to have to run on the surface of the wall, and I'm going to use a little bit of conduit just to cover it up at here. But bear in mind, there is this sort of recess on the SONOS Beam that gives you the ability to plumb your cables in. Now, these also has a little bit of depth there, so if your cables are going into it, like the HDMI that comes with it is straight on. I don't even think you could get a right angled one in there unless it was away facing one, then you're going to see it underneath. So go with the straight ones. I'll find out in a minute when I've wall mounted it how much depth that gives you. The HDMI cable they give you is quite flexible. It's actually here, actually. It's quite flexible. It's not a rigid one, so I'm hoping that I can get quite a lot of bend on that, so that I won't see it behind the telly. I always like going Ethernet, so I'm going to plumb in the Ethernet. And then obviously, because you've got this recess, you'll be able to get your fingers underneath when it's wall mounted and plumb it in. But the important thing is, if you are going surface mounted, like I'm going to have to, unfortunately, then you've got this reveal. So it will allow your cables to drop down, and you'll just tuck them nicely away. There will have to be a bit of a gap, but you know, you want to keep that to a bare minimum. Okay, so let's get it hung on the wall and see what happens. Okay, so I've got this mounted on the wall now, and first thing to note is that actually you can see visually the bracket, and so just to reinforce the previous comment is that make sure you get the right colour. I mean, obviously you might want it to look black, black on black, or you might look white on black. Who knows? The other thing is obviously my cables have to run down, which I was a bit worried about how close this would run. But there's quite a good gap here. You know, I'd get my fingers to it. I haven't got my tape measure to hand, but I'd probably say there's a gap of probably about an inch there, which if you do need to run cables down the back like me, then you've got more than enough room. And I'm going to put a piece of conduit over, a bit of concaved or convex conduit, so there'll be more than enough room there. I expect that is probably more from an acoustic perspective, having that distance from the wall, maybe also heat, because I guess there'll be a certain amount of heat generation. If somebody's putting us up against wallpaper, then, you know, Sonos have probably considered all the reasons why they don't want it up against the wall flush. You know, all those things. So mine is actually not fixed yet, but you know, these two holes are just, you know, you can feel when you're underneath the rivet underneath, and then they screw up. I've actually only put 3 screws in, and it feels really solid. The raw plugs are really good. They bend over, so they're not like a rubbish raw plug. So definitely use the raw plugs. I'm in the UK, so I used an 8 size drill bit, even though the manual says to use 5 1/16. It's a US, so number 8 is what I used, 8mm. Masonry drill bit, which went through nicely, and the hole was perfect. So I mean, I've come into these points here because I've got power and AV running down, so I'm sort of power is there and my AV's there, so it feels really nice and solid. The raw plugs are really good, so you won't need to go and buy any other ones. Get some tape for the other thing. So now I'm going to hook it up and see how these cables fit into this recess here, and how successful that's going to be. So another thing to mention is that, I'm sure you've read the manuals, but given this is a video about mounting the telly, is that the Sonos needs to go specifically into the ARC port on the HDMI ARC port on your telly. Now my TV's is 2018 right now, and I bought this telly brand new in 2014, I believe. So yeah, it's quite old, 4 or 5 years old, so 2013, 2014 model, and it's got an ARC port on it, which is when ARC sort of came about. But basically, be conscious of which one is your ARC port, because mine, I will only be able to have side view of my telly when I've mounted it. So just take a note of which port, mine's a Samsung, but you see yours will be different, which port is the ARC, specifically the ARC port. You can hook up the beam with the optical cable. I'm not going to use that for reasons I won't bore you with, but do be conscious that you need to, you know, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, so I've got sort of half a dozen HDMI ports. So, you know, you don't want to be there fiddling around at the back trying to work out which one's which. Make note of which one's the ARC port. Make a little label if that makes it easy for you. But yeah, just be conscious that you need to know which one, whichever method you use, which one is the HDMI ARC port for the connectivity to the Sonos Beam. So the Sonos is all plumbed in now. The gap that I thought I was going to leave, and again, I've got to fill these holes in behind, but that's irrespective, was probably not, it's probably bigger than what I thought it was going to be. So what I would say is that having had it now plumbed in, maybe I would think about probably pulling it a bit closer to the TV, because from a distance, that gap that I've put is a little bit more sizable than I'd first expected. So I'm gonna keep my template, because I might change where that goes. Again, this is how I've navigated the cabling, which is probably about as clean as you're going to get it in terms of, you know, where the ports go. So I've got Ethernet, HDMI, and power into the array. The other thing to bear in mind, which is probably slightly off the purpose of the video, is that I was going to set this up as a surround sound, and I've only got one individual Sonos One, okay, and in the app won't allow you to connect a Beam and one Sonos One. You must have 2 Sonos Ones, if that makes sense. So if I want to do surround sound with this, I have to have 2 of these combined as a group, as a pair, as a trio. So, but ultimately, in terms of racking and installing this, you know, you can see the array at the bottom, the actual shelf. I've tried to keep the cables tidy as well as possible. You've got this natural gap that will be put there. You can shift it back a bit if you want to, because I've not screwed mine in, but ultimately, yeah, you will want to screw it in with the plugs that are provided. And that is how to mount a Sonos Beam.